Welcome to the Feeling Loudly podcast, a show about the power and magic of emotion, explored through the lens of astrology, divination, and art. I'm your host, Jana. I'm an astrologer, a tarot reader, Akashic Records reader, poet, and witch, and I'm here to help you feel your feels. Hi, loves. Welcome to Tarot. Today is Wednesday. It's not Tuesday, TBH. I'm a day late on this because last night I was up really late working on a monster of an article for the Astrophile Substack, which I have mentioned a couple times on here, but just to formally introduce what that is, it's a collaborative Substack that I created with Amanda Moreno and Amanda Painter, two incredible astrologers who I really admire and who I think some of you are probably already familiar with because I definitely mention Amanda Moreno's name on here all the time. Amanda Painter is a really incredible astrology writer, writes really poignant and inventive, I want to say, horoscopes that just take a really fresh look at the astro energies and the cosmic dance we're all a part of. Amanda Moreno, former teacher and colleague who has been really influential on my path as an evolutionary astrologer, and who I studied under at Portland School of Astrology, and then independently through Amanda's EA immersion. So two really, really amazing and super talented astrologers, and getting to collaborate with them on this Substack is really dope and exciting. And it's a place on the internet where we can just be a bit more freeform and less structured and experimental. We talk about astrology and spirituality and divination, and I'm sure we'll explore a lot of other corners of occult things and life things. But there's a lot of really raw and vulnerable and I think poignant stuff that has been published on that Substack so far. And it's completely free. We don't plan to monetize it anytime soon. So you're welcome to go and subscribe completely for free, theastrophile.substack.com, if you want to get 3 to 6 articles in your inbox each month. I think it's cool. I think you might like it. And the published piece that I mentioned from last night that took me forever was a really deep guide on Jupiter's journey through Gemini, which is a year-long transit that began on May 26th. I wrote this really big, huge baby of a guide to help you navigate that transit and to really maximize its potential for growth and for personal evolution. And it follows Mercury's journey through the signs, because Mercury is the planetary ruler of the sign of Gemini. And so it kind of acts as the captain of the ship for this Jupiter transit over the next year. And it has a bunch of key dates. It has breakdowns of each Mercury transit, of each Mercury retrograde through June of next year. And it also features preparatory prompts and reflection prompts for next year. Preparatory prompts right now for your rising sign. Amanda Painter mentioned that hers really resonated for her sun sign, so you can read it for your sun sign too, or other placements that speak to you. But I will link that below if you want to go check that out. And the Astrophile sub is always linked in the show notes now, so you can also go visit it whenever you want to. Is there anything else? I will mention again that the new podcast Patreon tier is available at $4 a month. You get access to private episodes and private Discord channels. And I'm going to be, again, revamping my offerings on the Cancer new moon. So if you're interested in booking any of my current offerings, like my Akashic Records readings that are focused on particular planets, which I think is cool, and I love those readings, but I'm going to be simplifying and ditching a lot of my more niche readings. So if anything is calling to you in Akashic Records or Astroland, I'd recommend booking this month. And you can book for any time 60 days out, but you do have to actually book the appointment this month if you want to lock those in. Okay, y'all, let's get into our card of the week. So I gasped and just like, and then laughed because I mentioned, I think on the last episode, which, what was it? Was it the Seven of Swords? I can't even remember at this point. No, it was the Nine of Swords. I mentioned that I thought it was just wild that all of our minor arcana episodes so far for this season have been swords. Every single one of them. We've had a couple major episodes. We've had an Empress episode and a Chariot episode, but the rest of the episodes, all swords. I mean, what have we done so far? We did the Three of Swords, the Four of Swords, the King of Swords, the Nine of Swords. And now we have the Ten of Swords. So you can see, if you know the tarot, you can see why I gasped because, it's just, I'm not selecting these, like, I'm not choosing these. I'm choosing them with my hand, but I'm choosing them just as I would pull a card if I were doing a reading for myself. And so it's pretty wild. There's obviously, heavy air energy in the skies at this moment. We have Jupiter newly entered Gemini last month, as I mentioned. We also have the Sun, Mercury, and Venus all in the sign of Gemini. And we just came off of our Gemini new moon. And this card, the Ten of Swords, is connected to the moon in Gemini. And so I would invite you to think back on that new moon. I'm completely spacing on what the date was. I think it was the 4th. What's the date today even? What year is it? I don't even know. I'm going to tell you in a second. Was it really the 4th or was it the 8th? It was the 6th. Wrong on both counts, but I got the low and then the high estimate there. It was the 6th. It was just last week. It was 6 days ago. And so what was going on for you around the 6th? I talked about this in my Patreon new moon episode, and I shared a reading, a 3-card tarot spread, our usual, via my newsletter and on Patreon. And you're welcome to sign up if you want to go listen to that, but it is private now. This new moon was building up to tension this weekend, and even like as of yesterday, we had some tense transits and they're not quite letting up. We've still got some tense stuff happening. We had yesterday's Mars-Pluto square, and then over the weekend we had these heavy Saturn squares. And it's interesting because, like, when I think about the Ten of Swords, I don't necessarily think Gemini. Like, I don't associate it with Gemini per se, but then I realized that the stuff that I was talking about in that new moon episode was very Ten of Swords-esque. And actually the Akasha scope that I recorded for Patreon also was very Ten of Swords-esque. The Ten of Swords is the final card of the sword suit if you're just looking at like the 1 through 10 numbered cards. If we get into the court cards, it goes page, knight, queen, king, so we've still got 4 more cards. But often people consider the tens completion. They consider it an ending that makes way for a new beginning. And part of what I've been talking about a lot in various places lately has been the way that our minds can lead us into nightmarish places. And I think that that's really true when we have so many planets in Gemini and so much mental energy floating around. It can lead us to really intense places at times. And, after the Nine of Swords episode where I was talking about like ideation and self-harm and all these more heavy, like traumatic topics, it feels interesting that we've now reached the 10, that we're now coming into some degree of completion here. And there's this feeling that I get as I look at this card that this person is suspended in time. And it's almost like they have 2 swords that are crossed over their head, and then they have this figure that's like holding 2 swords and about to pierce them. It looks like there's one that's right between their legs, and there's one that's approaching their side, like their ribs. And then they have these other swords, these other 6 swords that are just kind of like laying all over the place around them. And so the Ten of Swords can be associated with experiences of intense loss and really painful, endings at times, often that come on the heels of a lot of overthinking, a lot of fear, a lot of rumination, and all of the stuff we really get into when we look at, like, especially the 5, the 7, and the 8, and the 9 of swords, that is. We go from this place of like intense mental anguish, and then we, move into the 6 of swords, and we try to move beyond that, and we try to move into calmer waters, but then we face some moment of deception or avoidance, whether it's deception from another or from ourselves, living in denial, avoiding our problems or avoiding the fearful thoughts that are kind of eating us up from the inside. And then when we get to the 8 of swords, we feel trapped there. We feel kind of like paralyzed and immobilized by our fear. We think we're in a prison, but it's usually a prison of our own making. And then we get to the 9 of swords, and it's like, oh, maybe I'm in an actual prison now. Like, not literal, although that could be, but like more, those fears become very real, and it can turn into the sort of like obsessive, fixated, even like psychotic episode level fear, which I described in the 9 of swords episode. And then the 10 is sort of this moment of like, this is it. And so appropriately, our oracle card that I pulled for this episode as a companion is the Death card. And this is from the Prism Oracle, so I'll go ahead and read the description. The Death card in a reading is not about literal death, but instead about a phase or cycle of your life that's dying out. Like the leaves falling from the branches in the fall, this part of your life needs to die out to create space for new leaves to emerge in the spring. This can sometimes be difficult, and it's only natural to mourn if you feel like you need to. Just know that a whole new phase of your life is getting ready to begin. And so when we're in a 10 of swords moment, it's often hard to reach toward the potentials that can come from an ending, because that ending is often, again, extremely painful. And it's one that we've probably been dreading for so long that dread has put us into a really awful headspace, to the point that, like, if you've been in this kind of zone before, you might resonate with this. Personally, often the dread and the buildup to a really painful ending has been even worse than the ending itself. Like, I've talked about this probably on here a few times, that when I was in a relationship where there was a lot of like gaslighting and manipulation and betrayal, the fear that I lived with constantly was so much worse than when I actually discovered the betrayal that I had feared. It's like I was so anxious and so hypervigilant and so knocked off center for so long and in such a state of imbalance and fear, that when I actually discovered after the breakup that my partner had in fact cheated on me, and when like another betrayal, a different kind of betrayal happened that ended the relationship months prior, those moments to me were almost like subdued. And they almost, like, although they were painful and it sucked, it was nothing compared to the ongoing stress and fear that had been taxing me for years at that point. And so that, to me, that moment of like recognition that the end has arrived is very 10 of swords. And in that way, we don't often think about it this way, but in that way, it can offer some degree of peace, because it's like the end of a painful experience. And although that ending is painful in itself, it also represents some degree of relief that's either there presently or is on the horizon. And so I want to read some of the 10 of Swords keywords from the Lilifer little guidebook, just to throw these out here and kind of help us root and expand the meaning that might be coming through here. So the 10 of Swords upright is connected to betrayal, exhaustion, collapse, feeling like a failure, martyrdom, violence towards self, and backstabbing behavior. But when we look at the reversed keywords in this guidebook, it says rising above, overcoming struggles, and learning from the past. So the upright keywords that I just described kind of speak to both of those elements. Like there's the betrayal potentially. Often there is betrayal with the Ten of Swords experience. There's backstabbing. But the feelings of exhaustion and collapse are what kind of like are precede the relief, right? Like when we recognize how exhausted we are and when we are forced into surrender, when we're kind of forced to give up, that's often when we become free, not unencumbered, but when we become free is when we kind of recognize that something can no longer go on, that we can't do it. We can't push forward. We have to call it. We have to make a decision and we have to go. Or maybe that choice is made for us. And so the death card coming up here as a companion is like, there's a permanency to that, right? Like, although death is this transformative process and this sort of like alchemizing experience that we go through metaphorically all the time when we go through life transitions and endings and all of that stuff, there is also a sort of like a finality to it. And finality can bring relief when you've been stuck in a cocoon or when you've been stuck in a place that's really painful and draining and just sapping your spirit. Like having an ending, putting a period at the end of the sentence can actually eventually lead to a lot of empowerment. And I want to move to our song because I think that the song today is very potent and I got a little bit choked up. This is a song that's meaningful to me. I love this song. It's The Night We Met by Lord Huron. And it's funny because in the past, like I've read the lyrics for the song a bunch of times because it's come up in shufflemancy for me a lot, especially in recent months. And I thought it was interesting that when I was Googling other people's takes on this song, a lot of people were like, this is such a common wedding song, but the band has responded at times and been like, y'all, like, have you read the lyrics? Like, do you really, okay, like, do your thing, but this is not like a happy romance song. This is a song about regret. It's a song about wanting to go back to the moment that you met someone who you hypothetically loved, were in love with, and to make a different decision to not walk forward with them because you want to avoid the incredible pain and the ultimate ending that you ended up facing, which you could not have foreseen at that time. Maybe you could have. Sometimes when we're beginning a relationship with someone or setting off on any kind of new path, we might have a moment of doubt or of knowing that comes up within us that's like, I don't know about you. And like it's hard because especially in like sexual relationships and romantic relationships, there's often like so much chemistry, like literal like, you know, hormonal chemistry that's contributing to our decisions that it's hard for us to sort through what's intuitive and what's like our loins wanting shit or our heart like yearning for connection or whatever. Can't believe I just said loins. But it's hard to decipher at times and it can really do a number on us. And that's something like, oh my God, I've been through so many times, is being in the sort of like vice of a really tantalizing romance that obscures my vision and causes me to doubt or like suppress my knowing and to move forward anyway. And to move through that swords experience where there's a lot of mental anguish and a lot of pain that was avoidable and ends up being teachable usually, but like that doesn't negate the fact that it's painful as fuck and it's not fun. It's not fun to experience intense heartbreak, to experience betrayal, any of that stuff. And so I've had these moments where like even though I'm a person who like I don't really associate with the idea of regret as much because I am just like, you know, it happened and it's life and we're here and we move through it and we learn from it. I have definitely had, though, moments where I've been like, I regret ever saying yes, or I regret ever like answering the phone or responding to that DM, or like opting in to a situation that ultimately caused intense heartbreak and often trauma. And I think it's challenging because when you're at the other end of that, and especially if there's a lot of unhealed stuff, it can just feel like this was meaningless pain. And I even talked about this a little bit in my criticism episode from last week about how, like, recently grieving an ending of a relationship and how the whole process, the whole experience just felt kind of like senseless at the end of it. And within a couple days, I was like, well, it didn't feel senseless at all. Like, I was just in a really like heartbroken space when I was processing that and when I was talking about it on the podcast. But now, just like 4 or 5 days later, it doesn't feel senseless. It actually taught me a lot. And I knew that, but in that moment, I was really rooted in the senselessness of it, and even rooted in a degree of like self-victimization over what had happened. And it's interesting that things can change so quickly, because that was very much a Ten of Swords experience. And now my thoughts on it, my feelings of it, my feelings about it have shifted so much, even just in the span of a few days. And that really speaks to the energy of the Gemini moon here and how mutable our emotions can be when we're moving through intense grief and through heartbreak and through loss and betrayal and any kind of suffering. Our emotions can change so quickly, but it's really difficult often to foresee that and to be like, yeah, things are going to get better. Like, if you've been through enough heartbreak, you know it will eventually, but there are some types of loss that stay with you, and some relationships and some experiences that you just keep grieving. And sometimes it's difficult to know, is this going to be one of those situations where I bounce back in like a week and I feel like myself and I have my little hot girl summer and I go out there and I'm good and like whatever? Or is this going to be one of those things that like almost has me out of commission because I fall so deeply into depression that I like can hardly pull myself out? And personally, I know myself well enough to know what I can bounce back from for the most part and what might really destabilize me. But this situation in particular surprised me in that I went through both experiences. Like, I fell into a pretty deep depression for about a month, and then I had a bounce back, and then I fell into another depression, and then I had another bounce back, and I'm feeling more alive and really hopeful about the future in this moment that I'm recording this, but that could change tomorrow. I don't think it will, but who knows? It could, but who knows? And that's sort of the uncertainty that we might reach when we arrive at a 10. It's like there is this finality to it, but there's also a lot of uncertainty that we have to face because we just don't know what tomorrow necessarily looks like. And I think just as much as grieving an ending and the loss of what was, we kind of open up to the grief of not knowing what will be. And the 10 can represent this like clearing of the slate where we can choose to see it as a new opportunity and kind of start afresh and treat it as this death moment that makes space for new life to emerge. Or we can keep hanging on, and we can keep kind of like retracing our steps and ruminating on the conversations and asking ourselves, what if I'd done this differently? What if I'd made that choice instead? What if they had done this differently? What if they had made that choice instead? Or what if the circumstances were different? Or will it come back? Or like all of these moments where we might try to revive something even that is dead. And not to get incredibly morbid, but I am going to get pretty morbid here. So we had an incident at my apartment last week where there was like a really gnarly smell in the stairwell. My upstairs neighbor texted me. Shout out to my Threads fam. If you remember Cookie Boy, Cookie Boy texted me. No, we are not dating and we're not canoodling in any way. And for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, just don't worry about it. But anyway, my upstairs neighbor texted me and was like, it smells like something died in our stairwell. Do you know what's going on? And it turned out that a person had actually passed away, that his upstairs neighbor had passed like days prior and didn't have family apparently. And so you can fill in the details. It's very hot here, and probably no one discovered what was happening for several days. And so it was pretty upsetting and really sad. It was really sad to imagine that this person didn't have anyone to check on them, that their death had to be discovered because another neighbor put in a service request or a work order because the smell had gotten so bad. And that, like, the way that their life ended was alone and was in who knows what type of suffering they experienced, who knows what happened, who knows how long they were in pain, and who knows how long they were alone. And in this place where they didn't have anyone to check in on their well-being. I also had to, like, I saw, I'm going to avoid getting too graphic, but I witnessed, like, the body bag and the stretcher and everything, and was just thinking about how there's often, like, so little dignity that we experience in the death process. Like, being in a bag on the ground in the heat is a reality for a lot of us when our lives end. And I had texted my neighbor that and was like, it's just kind of, it's sad, and it's sad to imagine going that way. And he was like, we all go that way. We just have to hope that we don't go alone. And that can be one of the bigger fears that I think a lot of people experience, is dying alone, or, like, your life ending without a companion or without people around you who care about you and love you and check up on you and come knocking on your door when you don't answer your phone or when you haven't been seen around in a few days. And I'm someone who lives alone. A lot of my neighbors are older people who live alone. And so it's kind of this interesting question to contemplate. Like, what does it mean to have an ending that feels graceful or dignified versus, like, not? Is that even the right word? It feels a little bit cheap to use that word here, because I don't think the death process itself should ever be considered, like, dignified or undignified. Like, it's a part of life. We all die. We all meet our eventual fate and probably end up in a bag. And that's just reality. And sometimes coming face to face with literal death, even though that's not exactly the topic of the Ten of Swords today, but coming face to face with literal death can help us kind of conceptualize the more metaphorical deaths that we might experience in our life. And it's something that some people experience and see all the time. And it's also something that some people very rarely witness or are close to, the death process, the dying process. It's something that gets kind of, like, hidden away. Like, even our apartment managers, like, didn't want to tell anyone, and I'm sure there were legal reasons for that, but, like, they were very hush-hush about it. No one wanted to talk about it. But I was very freely talking to my neighbors, and we were like, yeah, like, someone died. Like, our neighbor died. He's gone. Like, that person who none of us knew is gone. He's not here anymore. And there's now this empty apartment that has housed death and that someone else will move into in probably like a month. And they probably won't even know that someone passed away in the apartment that they're about to reside in. But likely for any of us who live in an apartment or in an older home, it's very likely that someone has passed away in the space that we inhabit. And again, I'm not talking about this to like bring anyone down into the dumps, although I'm sure I've done that for some of you, and I'm sorry. But more so to kind of like normalize the fact that like this is a part of life. And I think that, again, facing actual death and coming to accept it instead of shy away from it can be something that helps us process and move through the more symbolic or like living experiences of the Ten of Swords when we're faced with surrender, and when we can try to continue to hang on to the remnants of what was, or we can clear the rubble and we can make space for something new. And in that way, the Ten of Swords can feel sometimes like a tower moment, like the Tower card, and the renewal might feel like the Star, which comes after the Tower. But the Ten of Swords often represents sort of like the ending of one pivotal part of our lives, whereas the Tower sometimes feels like the whole fucking thing is coming down. It can feel like a crisis, not necessarily, but often. And we have a little bit, I feel, a little bit more choice in Ten of Swords experiences. It's not like the Tower where like we've really kind of like met the maker and it's like you have hung on for too long. You had the opportunity when we encountered the death card to let go, but instead you decided to cling, and so now you face the crumbling. I'm getting a little bit off track here and kind of in this like Geminian wandery energy. But to reel it back in, I do want to read the lyrics from The Night We Met to reground in that. And then we'll close out a little bit early tonight because I'm sleepy. So, The Night We Met. I'm not the only traveler who has not repaid his debt. I've been searching for a trail to follow again. Take me back to the night we met. And then I can tell myself what the hell I'm supposed to do. And then I can tell myself not to ride along with you. I had all and then most of you, some and now none of you. Take me back to the night we met. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, haunted by the ghost of you. Take me back to the night we met. When the night was full of terrors and your eyes were filled with tears, when you had not touched me yet, oh, take me back to the night we met. I had all and then most of you, some and now none of you. Take me back to the night we met. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, haunted by the ghost of you. Take me back to the night we met. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. This person has experienced a great deal of pain from a relationship and probably some degree of like mental torture, a la the Swords journey. And they continue to be haunted by the experience or by the energy of this person who was probably very meaningful to them at one point, but who they've come to regret in some way, who they've decided they would be better off if they had like never said yes and never walked that path with them. And I, again, like speaking as someone who has had similar thoughts before, but would genuinely look back at my relationships and say I don't regret participating in any of them, because maybe this is like my Venus and Pisces talking, that can be sort of eternally hopeful and at times like, you know, see the glitter and see the love and continue to see the meaning and the impact. I would love to make different choices in those relationships and to avoid a lot of the like literal trauma that I acquired from certain relationships. But there are really no relationships where I completely regret participating in them, because they were a part of my journey and I am where I am in some way because of them. And that's why I often kind of like side-eye the idea of regret, because there's so much in our life that would not be here were it not for those experiences that were formative for us. And that does not eradicate the pain, and that does not eradicate the suffering and all of the healing that we have to do in the wake of experiences like that. But it is a reminder, I think, of all of the beauty that exists in our life too. And the fact that, like, if I were to really retrace my steps and go back to a moment in time, a fork in the road, and to choose differently, then there's so much that I love in my life now that I acquired along that path and experienced along that path that I would not have acquired or experienced had I not walked it, had I not said yes. And so a part of me feels like this narrator in this song is sort of like at the moment that I was in a few weeks ago and even last week, where I was experiencing regret and kind of questioning, like, why did I participate in this relationship that ultimately brought me a lot of pain? And the fact is, like, it brought me so much joy too, and it brought me so much self-insight and wisdom and knowledge and an experience of love that was very, very beautiful, and connection, and just like eye-opening experiences. And to like toss the baby out with the bathwater and be like, that was all shit. And like, because I'm in pain, I'm going to paint this with broad strokes and say like it, you know, wasn't worth it or whatever. I just don't feel that. That's not how I feel. And I think there's this moment that we have with the Ten of Swords where we get to choose what we take away, where the rubble is on the ground and the pain is all over the place, and we get to kind of choose what energies we walk forward with and what energies we walk into our ace, our new beginning with, or into the court cards if you want to consider those a continuation. We have the Page of Swords where we embark on this new intellectual journey and maybe pick up a new study. Maybe we like find a new hobby or something to occupy us and to kind of take up the brain space that was previously occupied by a lot of pain and anguish and maybe hyper focus and obsession and whatever else, all the swords stuff, all the later sword stuff. And so I think like the element of choice is super important here. And because this is a mercurial card with Gemini and the moon here, Gemini moon ruled by Mercury, there is this element of like making the choice to think differently about something and offering a perspective shift, offering a reframe to yourself. And the way that that sort of reframe can be incredibly empowering and can set us on the path of healing and recovery and set us on the path of a new beginning. For me, like even in the last, like I really generally hate dating apps, but I was like, you know, I need to like distract myself. Like I need to focus on something else because my cute little obsessive brain can really fixate on my pain to the point that I just like re-injure myself over and over again by like scraping off the scab and not allowing it to heal. And so I had to like switch my focus intentionally to something else. And part of that was like spending hours writing that massive Jupiter and Gemini guide. And another part of it was like, I'm going to fucking download the dating app. I'm going to go on Bumble and I'm going to like remind myself that I'm a fucking catch and that like I can connect with people and have a good time and be lighthearted and joyful. And making that decision was really great. Like, even though I still don't like dating apps, it was really great to remind myself of that. And like, I'm going on a date this week and maybe next week too. And maybe the week after that. Like I have like, you know, I'm talking to some people and they're cute and they seem cool. And it just like opens up new possibilities that we can't see when we're really entrenched in pain. And when we're really entrenched in like, you know, focusing on our suffering and staying stuck, focusing on our suffering to the point that it's not really productive, to the point that we're again just sort of re-injuring ourselves. So I guess I kind of want to wrap it up there. I want to come back to one line from this song though to to close this out here. So I want to come back to the beginning. The beginning verse of the song says, "I'm not the only traveler who has not repaid his debt. I've been searching for a trail to follow again. Take me back to the night we met." And so this feeling of like having not repaid your debt. I am not the only traveler who has not repaid his debt. It almost feels like this experience to him felt karmic in a way. And like it felt as though he was being punished in a way, and that's why he came upon this experience, was because there was some outstanding debt that needed to be settled. And when he says, I've been searching for a trail to follow again, take me back to the night we met, it feels as though like he was on this path with someone, and then when that relationship ended, it's like his whole path disappeared and vanished. And again, that takes me back to the sort of like what can be a scary potential with the Ten of Swords, or even a really exciting one. Like if you don't have a trail to follow again, then that means you get to kind of like whack your way through the wilderness and create one, or maybe happen upon one that you never would have discovered had you not been derailed, or had you not experienced this ending that left you in that position where you're just standing there empty-handed, like, what do I do? And so if you've experienced an ending recently, or if you're reflecting back on endings previously in your life, I would love for you to consider, like, where are you standing right now? And what energy are you standing in? Are you standing in the idea that this is all pain, and that, like, your path is fucked and you should just retrace your steps and go back to where you were in time and try to, like, change the outcome? Obviously, we know that's not possible with our current technology. But there are some occultish ways to kind of do some time traveling. And we can do that in our hearts and our minds all the time by ruminating, right? By like imagining ourselves going back and making different choices. And I think that's something a lot of us do when we're facing really painful endings, is like, again, grappling with it. Like, what if I had made this choice instead? What if I could go back in time and choose differently? Where would I be right now? Which is really futile and like a really painful exercise to take yourself through that just causes more pain. But a lot of us do it. And so if you've been there, what if instead of that, you came back to where you're standing right now in the loss, or in a prior loss, or in something you've been reflecting on? What if you came back to where you're at right now and asked yourself what new paths have emerged, or what new paths you can create from this place that you're at now? Maybe even using that pain to generate anew and to create anew from where you're standing in this moment. That's all I got. I love you. And as always, if you enjoy the pod, please do rate it, comment on it. You can also send me messages. I'm asking because I like words of affirmation, but I also like constructive feedback. So I'm always open to that too. I love hearing from you guys, and if you would like to submit a question for a future AMA episode, please do so via the Spotify episode page or my contact form on my website, or you can send in a voice message using the link below. Take care, y'all.